I'm Josh Christensen.
I'm David Salazar.
And this is Most Innovative Companies. On today's episode, Fast Company senior writer Ainsley Harris.
The sidewalk is meant to be for pedestrians, and these guys are sort of disrupting that purpose in a lot of ways.
Author of the new book, Bonfire of the Murdochs, Gabe Sherman.
If you had to boil down Rupert's number one philosophy about business, I would say it's control.
And as always, keeping tabs.
The interplay between these people and the right wing is really not to be taken for granted.
But first, here's the download, the news you need to know this week in the world of business and innovation.
You have 1 week to wow us, is essentially what Warner Brothers Discovery said to Paramount this week. Though Warner's board is still currently recommending shareholders back its proposed merger with Netflix, it has reopened its bidding process to allow Paramount to make its best and final offer. Whoever becomes the highest bidder, an acquisition is likely to face strong regulatory scrutiny, something Paramount says it could help navigate given its success merging with Skydance last year.
Oh,
that was a very cursory way to put it because we don't have the time to really get into the weeds here.
There's so much. I think we should do a longer segment on Warner Brothers Discovery and this whole saga at some point, but probably after we know exactly what's going to happen.
Yeah, you can tell Ted Sarandos is putting in the work to get this to happen, though.
Yeah. Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg appeared in a Los Angeles court yesterday to testify in a landmark social media addiction trial. The case centers around a 20-year-old and her parents who claim her use of social media worsened her depression and suicidal thoughts. The family's lawyers are citing internal documents at companies like Meta, stressing the goal of making their apps difficult to put down through features like infinite scroll, autoplay, and push notifications. Attorneys for the tech companies say that their clients have become scapegoats for complex emotional issues children may face.
Yeah, man. And they totally don't make those complex emotional issues worse for money.
This is the whole thing. Yeah.
Can you convince a court of that?
Issues.
Who's to say?
Yeah, I don't know, man. I don't want to be sued.
Yeah, I didn't say any of that. 2026 has not been kind so far to the so-called Magnificent Seven tech companies on the stock market. The seven companies, Alphabet, Amazon, Apple, Meta, Microsoft, Nvidia, and Tesla, have all seen their share prices decline since the start of the year. Broader economic uncertainty is definitely a cause, but it could also be the result of massive capital expenditures the companies are making on AI. The Motley Fool estimates that in 2025, the Magnificent Seven spent about $400 billion on AI-related CapEx.
Just a small amount of money. Just a little bit.
Just a little.
Just a little bit. Speaking of lots of money spent on AI, my transitions never cease to amaze me. Saudi Arabian AI company Humane announced Wednesday that they had invested $3 billion into Elon Musk's XAI. The investment makes Humane, created last year by Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, a significant minority shareholder in Musk's AI company, which recently merged with SpaceX, though the investment was made just before Musk merged XAI with SpaceX.
What is up with Elon's obsession with an X?
I don't know,
man.
It's
so weird.
So lame.
Even Peter Thiel was like, that shit sucks. No one's good. I think he was people are going to think it's a porn company.
Yeah.
And, that is ultimately what Musk has achieved.
Is a porn company. Let's be honest.
Yeah, that's what they're doing. But you know what? It took a while. He's realized it's so he can do that dumb little jump that looks like an X. So he says.
Oh my God. Yeah. Well, X jumps are a big part of P90X.
Oh, is that true?
Yeah. So Tony Horton is on board with it, but also maybe a little bit jealous about the domain name.
I only know about Tim Horton.
I love a donut hole. I love a tidbit.
Okay, Timbit.
Yeah, that's their little donut holes.
You said tidbit.
Tinbits?
No, it's Timbits.
Timbits?
Yeah.
I can't say letters, David.
It's okay. I'm sorry.
Keep this all in.
Yeah.
Roast me in the comments, Canadians.
The news is coming full circle this week. We started with Paramount and we're ending with Paramount. Stephen Colbert on Monday claimed that Paramount-owned CBS didn't air his interview with Texas Senate candidate James Tallarico due to concern that doing so would require the network to provide equal time to Tallarico's opponents in the Democratic primary. Though late-night shows have historically been treated as bona fide news interview programs and thus exempt from the FCC's equal time rule, A January letter from agency chair Brendan Carr suggested he was rethinking that exemption. It has not formally changed how the FCC treats late-night shows. CBS told Fast Company Tuesday in a statement that its lawyers suggested ways to fulfill the equal time requirements. However, Colbert opted to upload the Tallarico interview to YouTube and promote it on air Monday night.
More market share for YouTube.
What a mess. What a mess.
Yeah, we had gone without some Brendan Carr headlines for a little while, and man, he just comes roaring back into the picture.
You can't go threatening broadcasters that you're going to cause them to adhere to rules that you haven't formalized yet. That's quite literally a chilling effect.
It is. It's very much like it's a shame if something should happen to that nice late night show you should have there. It's very mafioso tactics, which the FCC under Brendan Carr has had from the beginning. And if you listen to a Verge podcast, as you will know, Brendan Carr is a dummy. And that's the news you need to know today. So, David, what was the last thing you purchased on a takeout app?
The last thing I had delivered, food-wise...
Well, Uber Eats delivers just about anything, David.
Yeah, I've actually used their courier service before, and it's useful. Yeah, it's really useful, actually, and decently cheap. But the last thing I had delivered, I think, was Indian food the other night.
Nice.
Which was, delicious. What about you?
Oh, God. I've been trying to order out less and then just walk to stores more. Mm-hmm. This isn't some virtuous
I was going to say, did you do this to gotcha me?
Yes, I did. Well, David, I support local businesses, not big tech. No, I did it because my buzzer is broken. And so they can ring me, but I can't buzz them in. So I have to walk downstairs anyways to let them in. I might as well just go to the store overall. So that's really the reason. But now I'm kind of I'm saving a little bit of money and I'm getting outside.
Those fees
which is always
will
good.
Get you.
They will get you, especially Instacart. Instacart is a thing that it's really convenient in New York. But they did open up a grocery store a block from me now.
Beautiful.
So it's really close and it's a decent enough grocery store where I can get staples and they have a pretty good meat section and stuff like that. I just their produce aren't very good. So I have to go somewhere else for produce. But Instacart fees kill you, man.
Yeah, they're terrible. And I think in New York, DoorDash specifically has a thing that's this is the New York City regulatory fee. And it's really just saying, fuck you for living here and living in a city that requires us to pay the drivers a decent wage hourly.
Yeah, there is always that. There is always that. I try to tip well, but
Same, and I don't use DoorDash as much as possible just because of that.
I use Uber Eats when I do order.
Interesting. I've been a Grubhub boy since I moved here. Since 2011, I've been using Grubhub.
Yeah, I was Grubhub for a while. Seamless was kind of the main app that I would use. But now, Uber Eats has been the one that I've gone to. It's been a little bit more reliable. And now Instacart. I use Instacart a decent amount. Although I'm trying to cut back. I got to stop. It's so expensive. Groceries are expensive, David.
It's bad. We're in a bad situation grocery-wise.
I think it's also kind of skewed, people in cities' reactions to grocery prices because they're also using apps like Instacart and they're my groceries are so expensive. But a good chunk of that is fees and tip.
No, I can confirm. That. I still just go to the grocery store and it's expensive.
It is expensive. No, it is true. It is true. Although, honestly, I've been going to H Mart a lot recently.
I love H Mart.
I love H Mart too. Prices have been pretty good, particularly for seafood, which I do a lot of seafood.
You're on the Upper West Side?
I go to the one on the Upper West Side. Sometimes I take my car and I go into Westchester.
The one in Westchester is nice.
The one in Westchester in Yonkers is
oh my God. And the prices are actually really good.
They are. Yeah, that's worth it. I'm in Inwood, so it's 20 minutes.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, that's good. I'll take my car and go to, wow, we're trash. I'll take my car. And there's one in Long Island City that's really nice and has a little food court, but also those prices are much better usually than, there's one in K-Town where it's so expensive because they're paying K-Town rent.
Well, we're talking about this because we're going to be talking about delivery and the delivery economy today. So lots of headlines have been made about autonomous vehicles like Waymo scaling up their fleets in cities across the country. But if you look to the sidewalks, there are smaller, admittedly cuter autonomous vehicles. Although if you put some googly eyes on a Waymo, it's pretty cute. But there are vehicles popping up on sidewalks in cities like Chicago, where friend of the pod and Fast Company senior writer Ainsley Harris lives. Ainsley talked to David and I about what happened in her neighborhood when delivery robots started to take over the sidewalks. Hey, Ainsley, welcome back to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
Let's start, I think, at the very beginning. Set the scene for us. You made some new friends in your neighborhood. What was this? Who were they? And how did you come upon them?
Yeah, I made some new friends starting last year. First, a new friend called Coco, a little kind of pink robot that I found kind of sometimes going by on the sidewalks in my neighborhood. And at first it seemed sort of mysterious. I didn't really understand what it was doing or what it was there for. Was this sort of some sort of research project or something like that? But then starting last fall, we started to see these green and white robots as well on the sidewalk. They had kind of bigger wheels and they're more kind of like all terrain. They look like they could handle, a sidewalk that's falling apart. And they all had different names. Polly, all these different sorts of names. And that's when I started to get more curious because there also started to be robots just everywhere. You'd be taking the dog for a walk or I walked my kids to school. And suddenly we were encountering them, it felt like almost every other day. And I started to get curious and started to do a little bit of research and found out that there are these two companies that are really active in Chicago. There's some other companies as well in this space, but the two in particular are Coco Robotics and Serve Robotics. They're also active in cities like LA, Miami, a handful of others. Coco also works in Helsinki overseas. And essentially what they're doing is delivering food instead of your standard driver on an e-bike or in a car. And they're trying to sort of work with Uber Eats and DoorDash and sort of help out restaurants and also reduce people's reliance on cars. So in some ways, a great mission. But yeah, as I started to find sort of encountering them day to day, it's a little more of a complicated story than that, I guess.
That's so fascinating. I mean, they show up to the restaurant and they put the food in and then it sort of like goes on its little way on the sidewalks.
Yeah, you can see them sometimes kind of stopping outside like a side door or back door of there's like a taco place around the corner from me or a place with really great Chicago hot dogs. And yeah, I see them outside there all the time. And, someone will come out of the kitchen, the robot lid will open up, you put the food in and off it goes. They're battery powered and they are designed to be kind of cute. And so there's something very appealing about them, I think, at first. But yeah, my neighbors have started to get a little irritated. You start to realize like where the sidewalk is narrow, or if you live above a restaurant, for example, these things can become a real nuisance.
Like blocking your door and stuff or just everywhere?
Blocking your door, the Serve robots make this kind of like da-da-da, da-da-da sound just like constantly. So if you can imagine like a small army of those, it's a little irritating. And also, don't always know what they're doing. So the idea is that AI is sort of at the steering wheel here and helping them navigate sidewalks. And the companies will come into a new neighborhood and they'll sort of, map them out before they start operating there. So they have some idea of like the lay of the land, or maybe there's a place that is impassable or something like that. But they are trying to rely on, these like NVIDIA chips to power these things and get them around. And sometimes that works better than others. I think there's not really a defined etiquette for how to interact with a robot on the sidewalk. And their default is sometimes to just sort of stop, even when that might actually continue to put them in your way. And I think people don't understand exactly how to interact around them. So by default, you end up sort of getting out of their way because you don't want to have your foot driven over or something like that. The Serve robot, for example, weighs 220 pounds when it's empty. So I think, there's a lot of concern that people have about, if I have like a little kid with me, if I have my dog, or if someone is disabled, for example, the sidewalk is meant to be for pedestrians. And these guys are sort of disrupting that purpose in a lot of ways.
Can you tell me a little bit more about the neighborhood reaction to this? I think you described your initial reaction to it, but you had some neighbors with some pretty strong feelings.
Yeah, my neighbor, a guy named Josh Robertson, is the first person to have started a petition to ban them. And he is, a dad with 2 young kids. And he was really concerned after having kind of like a weird sort of standoff encounter with them one day when he was out with his family in the neighborhood. And, I think not only that, he's, is someone who really cares about the neighborhood in the sense that it's a place we all love because it is so walkable. And it's a place where, people really value the street life and how that all works. And so, yeah, over 3,300 people have signed the petition so far. And the thing that was really striking to me in talking with him is that roughly a third of those have submitted an incident report along with their signature. So that's a lot of people who have had, what they view as pretty negative encounters with these robots. And, more and more of these stories are also coming to light because the city recently added a way to report incidents through 311. So I think there is sort of like a growing awareness that we need to be tracking, that we can't essentially rely on the companies to track for us what is happening on the ground.
Is there like substantial data around this? You mentioned the incident reports, but I think I guess the measure of this is is it more or less safe or intrusive than, e-bike riding delivery drivers or, what have you?
We don't yet, at least in Chicago, have that data. The one kind of data that the companies are saying they are sort of tracking or reporting and working with cities to try to understand is they obviously have a good understanding of where sidewalks or crosswalks are not working or broken in some way. So they are, saying that they are electing to share that information with cities so that, you could go and make repairs or perhaps even at some point change how the intersection works if it's not as functional as it should be for pedestrians or robots. But yeah, we don't yet know, is there actually a reduction, for example, in delivery car traffic because of these things? Or are they just actually, enabling the continued growth of the delivery economy? We can't really come to that conclusion yet.
Well, what are some of the incidents that people have reported? You mentioned in your story someone got poked in the eye by the safety flag and needed stitches, but have you been through some of the reports that they add with their petition signatures?
Storyline coming to the pit this season.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. That would be the least of the awful things on the pit. But yes.
True. That'd be the lighter fare.
Yes. Yeah. The comic relief. Yeah. A guy needed stitches. They have these visibility flags that are really designed more for when they're crossing the street for cars to see them. So they are at eye level, sort of, if you're a pedestrian walking then. And, I think the company would say that, well, if this particular incident were to be replayed, maybe this guy didn't look where he was going. But at the end of the day, people are not really expecting to see a robot on the sidewalk. So I think there's sometimes a misunderstanding there around the amount of sort of education that maybe they need to do, or that there is sort of this learning curve for all of us. And, I think there have been in this petition, there have been reports of people having their foot run over, of collisions, of people being really annoyed by the noise that they make. And also because they do just stop sometimes, they can, block an entryway to an apartment building, for example, or block your ability to get where you need to go. So, I think particularly in a neighborhood where people are walking a lot, these incidents are just sort of, the sidewalks here are sometimes narrow. It's an older neighborhood. Not all the infrastructure is brand new. And so I think because of that, there seem to be a lot of incidents here, maybe slightly less so than in some of the other neighborhoods in Chicago where they're active.
Right. It kind of seems like these were made for the suburbs. And I know that DoorDash is testing its own proprietary delivery robot in the Phoenix metro area. But that's sprawl. Mm-hmm. Restaurants aren't close. You don't have great bike infrastructure. It would be crazy to bike that far. But urban Chicago feels like a weird choice for this. Do you know where else these companies are operating, and are they facing similar issues in these areas?
There hasn't been another petition. They are pretty savvy at this point about working with governments up front. So I think we've all learned a lot from the scooter wars, and no one wants to go back and relive those years. And so cities are wanting to sort of get ahead of this, I think, but also the companies understand they need to engage. And so, I think we are finding that there is a licensing process in Chicago. Both of these companies are licensed to operate here. They're not sort of like rogue operators who have parachuted in. It's all part of a pilot program that will expire in 2027. So there is sort of this, prescribed learning period for everyone. People who are really upset would like to see that program shut down right away. And, I think a lot of the pushback in other cities has been a little bit more along the lines of, people posting on social media. There are sort of bad encounters. You can definitely find video of cars running into the robots and other things like that. There was a train in Miami that just like obliterated a robot that was stopped at a crossing.
God, I want to see video of that so bad.
Oh, it exists. I saw it organically even before we were talking about this. Oh, yeah. But like Brightline trains love to run into things. Like they have a lot of collision incidences. But I mean, I think it just got stuck on the tracks and it couldn't move. And this thing comes in and
Jesus Christ.
That's their default, is to stop when they're confused. And what the companies will say is
honestly.
That's, yes, but robots, they're just like us. They, I think they like, unlike a car, the idea is that, well, what's the harm in just stopping? Like, it's not like a car can stop in the middle of an intersection, but surely a robot can stop in the middle of a sidewalk. But yes, the incidents suggest that is not always the right choice.
Can you tell me a little bit more about these companies? Like how much have they, like you said, Coco and Serve are the two main ones operating in Chicago. Can you tell me a little bit more about like how much have they raised? What is their projection? Who is investing in these companies?
Yeah, Serve is actually publicly traded at this point. They were originally sort of spun out of Postmates. And so they are a public company, a small public company, but public all the same. And I think in some ways that has actually helped with transparency. You can go and see their investor presentations. You can find out that they would like to bring the cost of a robot delivery down to $1. And they're also probably the most aggressive about really relying on AI and not a human pilot to drive these things. So they're definitely interesting. Coco has backing from Sam Altman as an angel. And they have a partnership that they announced with OpenAI as well. So OpenAI is not an investor, but Sam and I believe his brother as well are investors in Coco. And yeah, Coco says it is hoping to build 10,000 of these things. So they also have probably the most aggressive goal at the moment that they've publicly stated in terms of sort of the scale that they're looking toward. And they are sharing data from the robots with OpenAI. I think we're finding that understanding physical environments is really useful for AI companies. It's sort of this like last missing piece to maybe getting over that next hurdle in terms of model development. So I think there's a lot of interest in that data and that real world data. And what better unstructured environment than a sidewalk with lots of unpredictable things happening? So yeah, that data sharing I think is really interesting, but that the whole idea of sort of video surveillance in sidewalks has also given a lot of people pause. And I think people are concerned, the companies say they like blur faces, same as like Google Maps car sort of mapping a neighborhood blurs a face, for example. But, at the same time, these are additional cameras in neighborhoods. And I think, not everyone is very happy about that either.
It is sort of fascinating to think about this as an example of the way that everything in the tech world right now is so connected, and how if you're ordering your DoorDash and you're getting it delivered by a Serve or a Coco, you're kind of an unwitting player in the rise of surveillance. And you're turning your neighborhood into a training opportunity of unstructured data for the company that has Sam Altman as a quote unquote angel investor. Funny, just a combination of him and the word angel is very funny to me. But it's kind of grim, but it's also just like deeply inconvenient also for a lot of people. So it's a weird combination of like Silicon Valley being like, here's a thing that will help the delivery economy continue to grow and also maybe be a good source of interest from AI, and not considering the downstreams of someone with a stroller or a wheelchair trying to get past it on a narrow sidewalk.
I think the other thing with sidewalks that is different from, like, say, scooters, which are, of course, supposed to go on the street, even if they do sometimes go on the sidewalk, is that I'm a homeowner and I directly pay for the upkeep of my sidewalk. It's not like roads where you're sort of in an abstract way paying for their upkeep. You pay your taxes and the roads get repaired. I can get penalized for the city if I had a damaged sidewalk and I'm not taking care of it. And so I do think there's like a different kind of sense here. I don't know if it's underlying people's frustration, but like I literally have to own and pay for my sidewalk. So it's sort of, in some ways, this different kind of public space that, I am required to directly maintain for the benefit of my neighbors. Meanwhile, the companies sort of, I can't remember which CEO said this, but he said something to me along the lines of, sidewalks are so underutilized. It's like, well, I pay for, if you're going to maximally utilize sidewalks, that's something that is going to flow back to me, and it's just a sort of strange way to think too about like a public good. It's like, are we like maximally using, I don't know, playgrounds and parks? Like, obviously we want them to be used, but like, we just don't, it's this very odd way to think that a company can sort of see an opportunity to take advantage of this underutilization of a public good. And that was sort of deeply concerning to me.
Honestly, that's a bullshit line from whatever CEO. Like, that's straight up dumb. I'm going to be honest.
Or like, again, like in a sprawl in Phoenix, the sidewalks are underutilized for sure. But again,
also because it's 120 degrees.
Well,
out
yeah, but even when it's temperate, you go to Las Vegas when it's not the summer, there aren't a lot of people on the sidewalks because everything's so far away from each other. Like that is a use case that makes sense. But to bring it to like urban areas feels really like the motive is not necessarily delivery. It feels like that's more of a training play for the AI, which,
it's also a growth at all costs mindset sort of thing. Like with the delivery economy overall, I think when you think about this, it's like, can this actually be a growth agent for the delivery economy? Yes. Like, is it necessarily like maybe there's some arguments around like, okay, safety and cost of, delivery drivers or what have you. And like, I can understand all of those arguments on just like a business level. But I when I was reading your piece, I think there was an anecdote about someone who was like ordering soccer cleats for their daughter. And it was just like, well, now if I have a delivery, they can bring me 3 and they can take them back. And I basically
just
was like,
go to the store.
Yeah. And I can understand to an extent sometimes like deliveries and last mile delivery for people who are maybe like shut in or things like that. Like, yeah, there are use cases there, but that's not actually what this is trying to address because that's not profitable. It's more convenience. It's like when we talked to Amazon's chief robotics officer a year and a half ago, and basically we're talking about like, well, we want to get delivery times quicker and quicker. And we got into like more of a broad conversation around like delivery times. And I was just like, yeah, but do we need to get something faster than 2 days? Like, I understand from a business standpoint in the supply chain, it's impressive and it's convenient and it's profitable. But like, why? Why do we actually need that? And I think that's all I was thinking about while reading this story, where I was like, I can see the utility, but like, why? Just like, why beyond that? We don't need 3 pairs of cleats delivered and being able to return one with a robot. It just doesn't seem necessary.
There's certainly times where it's helpful to have those super fast deliveries. I think any parent will tell you. But at the same time, the idea that like the only way to help the mom and pop shop is to sort of make something like this available to them is concerning, right? Like, I think it sort of puts us in a position of like, we'll have to fight for the little guy by adopting big tech in a different way. And that's the only way to counter the other forms of big tech. It's a sort of strange argument, I guess. And yeah, it is sort of hard to...
The Yimbies are going to be in our comments on this episode.
Yeah. Well, I think if you talk to the restaurant owners, I think, it's interesting to think about like how this would play out for local stores in the same way that delivery has played out for restaurants, right? 3 out of 4 restaurant meals are now eaten outside of a restaurant. And, for restaurants, that has in many ways been disastrous because, so much of that delivery economy sort of stack is eaten up by the delivery companies and, all these people. And, you need to have the app and you need to have this and you need to have that. And so the margins on that are so, so thin. And that's why a robot is then appealing, because the margins are sort of better. And maybe the labor, you don't have to worry about unreliable labor issues with delivery drivers who, may or may not be around on a particular day. But then, it sort of changes the nature of your business. And, is that really what every shoe store wants, is to go down that road? Like, I don't think so. When I think of like the local shops in my neighborhood and the people who run them, that's not the experience they are pursuing or why they opened their store in the first place. So, I think it would be concerning for us to go down that road that like everything turns into this sort of hollowed out storefront in the same way that a lot of restaurants have been forced to evolve.
Well, like everything on this podcast, it comes back to the death of the third place.
There we go. We should like ring a bell for that. Yeah. Every time we do an interview, it's like a third place loses its wings. And
has like, Brian Nichols' face on it. Okay, that's as good of a place as any to end this segment. Ainsley and David will be back with me for keeping tabs in a little bit. But first, a quick break followed by David's interview with Gabe Sherman. There are few people who have had as much influence on the world as Rupert Murdoch. Through his company, News Corp, Murdoch owns hundreds of publishing outlets across the US, UK, and Australia. The Times of London, the Daily Telegraph, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Post, book publisher HarperCollins, which I actually did not know until recently, and of course, Fox News. Now, though, Murdoch is 95 years old, and the lengthy succession battle that inspired the HBO show has been settled, with his son Lachlan being his official heir. It would seem we are at the end of Murdoch's story, which is why our guest today, Gabe Sherman, decided now was the right time to write a book on his life, his family, and his legacy. The book is called Bonfire of the Murdochs: How the Epic Fight to Control the Last Great Media Dynasty Broke a Family and the World. And David sat down with Gabe to talk about it.
Gabe, thanks for being here.
Good to be here. Thank you for having me.
I'd love to just set the scene a little. The book is about Rupert Murdoch, the patriarch of the News Corp owning Murdoch family, and his children. Could you give us just a rundown of the main players in this drama that has recently resolved in his eldest son, Lachlan, as the heir apparent, the guy who's going to inherit most of News Corp when Rupert dies?
Yeah, well, it's great to be with you. Yeah, the book is a family saga. I approached it as writing it as a biography of a family. So really the entire family is the main character. And so the book sort of covers three generations. It starts with Rupert Murdoch's father, Sir Keith Murdoch, who was a famous Australian newspaper reporter and publisher in the early and middle of the 20th century. Rupert inherited a single newspaper from his father, which he built into a global entertainment and news empire. And really the succession battle came down to the children from Rupert Murdoch's second marriage. He was married the first time to a former airline stewardess and model, Patricia Booker. He had one daughter with her, Prudence did not really play a role in the family company. But Rupert's second marriage to a journalist in Australia, Anna Torv, produced three children, and those children were really the main characters of the saga. The oldest daughter is Elizabeth, then her brother Lachlan follows, and then the youngest child, James, was born a little over a year after Lachlan was born in 1971. So those are the three main players, and over the next 30 to 40 years, they all competed both for their father's love, but also for their place within the company.
You have written about the Murdoch world before. You wrote a biography of Roger Ailes, the former head of Fox News, who shows up a few times in this book. What made you want to focus on this specific struggle for power within the family? Obviously, it fascinated the people who wrote Succession, but I think that the real life version is almost more fascinating.
Yeah, as one member of the Murdoch family told me, I had asked them about their thoughts on Succession, and they said, well, I've seen a few episodes, but to be honest, the real life version is much weirder and more strange. So I took that as inspiration that, yes, sometimes truth is more interesting than fiction. No, why do the book now? Several reasons. I've been covering the family on and off for the past almost 20 years. So I feel like I have this whole wealth of knowledge that I've built up. I also felt it was the right time to take a deep look at the story because we've sort of reached the end of the story. Rupert Murdoch turns 95 this March. And when I started writing the book in 2023, he was handing off the company to his eldest son, Lachlan. And this was what really precipitated the big legal showdown in a secret Nevada family estate court when Lachlan's three siblings were suing him to try to get control of the company. But in any event, I just thought we were really at the end game of this whole succession battle, which felt like finally we knew where the story was going to end up. And that just felt like the right time to do a book. It's really hard to do a book when you're in the middle of a story. Mm-hmm. But now that we're at this point, I had a clear beginning and a middle and an end.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I will say it's sort of Rupert Murdoch. One of the many things you take away from the book is that it's hard to know when his story is over. And I know we're talking about a man who's about to turn 95, but he is full of surprises. Throughout his life, he sort of reinvents himself. He changes wives, finds a new industry to conquer, a new market to go after.
Totally.
It seems like he is a font. I'm sure it was difficult condensing this, but I'd love for you to talk a little bit about how you approached reporting this, what your sources are. The endnotes here are extensive, but also you spoke to family members, et cetera, maybe not specifically about that courtroom battle, but you've spent a lot of time with the Murdochs, haven't you?
Yeah, I've met all the Murdochs except Prudence, who, as I said earlier, didn't play a central role in the family business until the very end when she joined the lawsuit with Elizabeth and James against Lachlan and their father. So I've known them all over the years. And like I said, I've been reporting on them for, almost, since the mid 2000s. And then when I decided to focus on the book, I built on that level of knowledge and went back to all of my sources and, really dug into things that I wanted to focus on. And I decided early on that I wanted the book to be a family story, not necessarily a straight business book. Although there is, for your audience, tons of business drama in the book, but it's told through the prism of how the family members were involved in these various deals and corporate maneuvers. So that was really the guiding focus of my reporting, is how to tell the story of the family drama at the heart of it. And to your earlier point about Rupert, the idea that he might live forever, it is true. He has defied expectations. He suffered several near-death health crises. He suffered a brush with bankruptcy in the early 1990s. He almost lost his entire empire. He really is the Zelig-like character who just kind of constantly continues to move forward. And I think we should point out his mother, Dame Elizabeth Murdoch, lived to 103 and was sharp as a tack to the very end. So this is clearly somebody who does not really show signs of really wanting to exit the stage. But in terms of the corporate story, he did hand the company to Lachlan, and we're sort of at that point now.
To go a little deeper on that, I think that, you do a great job chronicling him as someone who is just fully addicted to the grind, as you might say now.
No hobbies. My mental image of, if I thought of Rupert Murdoch's spirit animal, it would be a great white shark, because he is just single focused on swimming forward, hunting the next prey. He's totally remorseless. That makes him what a successful deal maker he's been. He's not sentimental. He breaks relationships. He dumps companies when he needs to. And that is just my image of him, is he just never stops moving forward. And there is something, again, regardless of what you may think of his politics, just as a pure businessman, there's something really formidable about that.
Yeah, and I think you do a good job of getting at the roots of whatever has been fueling him for, 90 some odd years, right? I mean, can you talk a bit about how his relationship with his father informed his drive, the chip on the shoulder of coming from Australia, and how that has been sort of at the center of his drive to acquire, drive to grow, and conquer new markets? Like, what is at the center of that?
It's a great question. And it's really the question that animated why I decided to tell this as a 3-generation story, because to understand the toxic dynamic that developed between Rupert and his own children, you need to really understand Rupert's relationship with his own parents. Mm-hmm. And going back to the beginning of the book, I write a lot about his childhood. He grew up the only son in a family of 3 sisters. He grew up basically a pretty lonely boy. His father was an Australian newspaper executive and journalist. He worked for the Melbourne Herald Times Group, which was the most prestigious paper in Australia. But he was consumed with work, like the way Rupert would develop. And basically, the only way Rupert could get his father's attention was by showing an interest in the newspaper business. One of the most sort of vivid scenes in the early part of the book is how on weekends, it would be the few times Rupert would ever get to really spend any time with his father. Mm-hmm. And he would sit in his bed with his father and watch him as he marked up the newspaper edition, critiquing headlines. And that sort of, I think, romanticized a little bit in Rupert's mind the newspaper business, because it was how he connected to his father. At the same time, his father didn't really think much of Rupert's academic credentials or even his fitness to inherit his place in the Australian newspaper world. There's many letters that are now published in archives where Sir Keith Murdoch, Rupert's father, would be writing to friends and associates and lamenting how disappointed he was in Rupert and worrying about Rupert, whether he had what it takes to walk in his shoes. I think another overlooked part of Rupert's childhood is his mother. His mother, Dame Elizabeth Murdoch, she alternates between being like sort of emotionally detached and cold, but also overbearing. And I think there's an example in the book that really stuck with me, which I drew from an interview that Rupert had given decades ago. And he talked about his childhood. And he said that when they took him from Australia to England when he was a little boy, and his mom decided it was his time to learn to swim. And so on the cruise ship, she took him and threw him into the swimming pool of this cruise ship. And he said he remembered that he was, quote, screaming and flailing. And obviously we know he didn't drown, but that image of a little boy just sort of flailing around the water for his dear life while his parents looked on. As a father of 2 young children myself, I could never imagine doing that. And really stuck with me as something that probably taught Rupert that no one's going to come to your rescue in this world. You're on your own, and it's literally sink or swim. And that, I think, also informed a lot of his ruthlessness as he got older. And one other thing I'll say about the other thing that Rupert learned from his childhood is that I think he learned the perils of not being the owner of a business. Many people talk about his father, Sir Keith Murdoch, as being a newspaper publisher. And while that is true, he worked for the Melbourne Herald Times Group, which was a family-owned business, and he was just an employee. He was not an equity holder in the business. And to really carve out a legacy, Sir Keith Murdoch bought 2 small papers in Australia, one in Brisbane and the other in Adelaide, 2 sort of regional cities. And those were his own personal family holdings, but they were very small newspapers. And those 2 companies are what he wanted to pass on to Rupert. But Rupert saw his father kind of build the Melbourne Herald Times into a empire in Australia. But near the end of his life, the Melbourne Herald Times owners sort of kicked him to the side. And Rupert had a lot of resentment about that, a lot of anger, sort of feeling that his father didn't get the respect he deserved. And that's also why throughout Rupert's life, as he built News Corp and Fox into a global empire, he always insisted that the Murdoch family retain ownership control of the board through a special class of voting shares. I think if you had to boil down Rupert's number one philosophy about business, I would say it's control. He just was determined to be in control of the company in a way that most CEOs are not of a public company.
That control kind of cuts both ways, right? I mean, he has such an immense amount of control over all the things that his business did that he would sort of just start cutting deals on a weekend. He wouldn't tell the board. He'd show up and have bought, financed millions of dollars in debt to to buy a business.
In the 1990s, he spent $400 or $500 million to buy Star TV, an Asian television satellite service that he was determined to break into the Asian media market. And on a sailing trip in the Mediterranean on his yacht, he just cut a deal and suddenly was in the Asian television business without alerting the board. I think one of the things also that strikes me about Rupert's career that I think is a lesson for corporate America, and I think this is a positive message, is that because Rupert had such control of the company, he didn't have to manage necessarily for quarterly earnings. He didn't have the pressures that a lot of public company CEOs have. And so he could really manage the business for the longer term. Rupert Murdoch took on leverage and debt in a way that very few public company boards would allow a CEO to do as he built his company. And, obviously there was risks involved. He almost went bankrupt in the early 90s. Mm-hmm. But the upside of that strategy was that he was able to just grow the business from its roots as a newspaper publisher. He created the first multi-platform television, newspaper, entertainment conglomerate. The whole idea of a global media conglomerate was really created by Rupert Murdoch. And he could do that because he used the cash flow from the newspapers to lever up and buy much bigger assets. And he could only do that because he had such control over the board, the way a public company is usually much more risk averse.
He definitely had that sort of control. And I think he also, just because of that, had a sense of invincibility about him. And I guess kind of still does. But there's a moment in the book that I think is a really fascinating microcosm of the entire point here, right? Which is there's the moment in the 90s where he's got debt from 146 banks, 10 currencies.
Yeah.
And he goes to all the people who hold his debt and they say, he gets a Citibank fixer to get everyone in line. I think you mentioned the old line, like if you owe the bank $100, that's your problem. If you owe the bank $100 million, that's the bank's problem.
Exactly.
Right? He gets everyone in line except one bank in Pittsburgh trying to hold him accountable, saying that if he can't pay, then he's going to default, and that would be the domino that topples everything. And the only thing that seems to stop it potentially is it's alluded to that George H.W. Bush may have intervened personally. What does that tell us about power? What does it tell us about, how is that a parable for the current state of people trying to hold CEOs accountable and the levers of power that they use to stay out of trouble or being held accountable?
That is one of the most specific Rupert examples of the entire book. I think it sort of braids together so many aspects of his style of business, the risk-taking, the survivor mentality, and then, yes, the ruthless favor trading with politicians. Rupert built his empire by cultivating relationships with politicians and using his conservative media outlets to promote politicians who would then repay the favor with either regulatory reform or, in this case, strong-arming a local Pittsburgh bank into cutting him a deal. That helped him out several times in his career. Obviously, when he went to purchase, one of the most famous examples is in the early 1980s, he purchased the Times of London, which is the most prestigious paper of record in the UK. Mm-hmm. And at the time, Rupert was known as a tabloid publisher, owning such titles as The News of the World and The Sun, the two most salacious tabloids on Fleet Street. And when he went to buy the Times of London, there was this huge outrage that it was going to be too much power in the hands of one newspaper baron. And because of Rupert had such a close relationship with Margaret Thatcher, a conservative politician that Murdoch's papers had helped propel into office, the Thatcher administration did not take up the merger as an antitrust battle. They basically allowed the Monopolies Commission of the UK government to overlook and just greenlight the deal. And so that's a primary example of how Rupert's relationships with politicians were instrumental in building his business empire. And as you had pointed out earlier, it was instrumental in him also staying out of financial ruin.
It does sort of seem like it's hard not to read this and see it as sort of like the early version of like the Silicon Valley ethos of moving fast and breaking things, and also the sort of, and I love to hear your thoughts on this, like the extent to which Rupert Murdoch created the archetype for the like boy king CEO. I'm so fascinated, having read this, just the extent to which we sort of live in the world that Rupert Murdoch created.
Totally.
Whether that's how CEOs operate, how news operates. What do you make of his influence on the CEO feeling like an all-powerful person? I mean, right now we have Elon Musk as a prime example of that, Mark Zuckerberg.
Yeah.
People who are so in control of things that it feels like if they make a wrong move, things could go south really quickly.
It is funny, right? Rupert Murdoch is the sort of the avatar or the icon of old media, newspapers and television. In many ways, yes, you're right, created the most modern version of the CEO that we see today. I think that plays out in several respects. Andrew Neil, who is a longtime newspaper editor who worked for Murdoch, he liked to compare the culture of News Corp to that of the Sun King. He said Rupert Murdoch ruled over News Corp the way Louis XIV ruled over France, and that all power stemmed from him. And I think that clearly, obviously, applies to CEOs like Mark Zuckerberg or Elon Musk, or, before he stepped down, Jeff Bezos at Amazon. These are companies that were built in the image of the CEO. So that clearly, obviously, is very much something that Rupert Murdoch created. I think the other thing we're seeing today that is so clearly out of the Murdoch playbook is the way in which Silicon Valley CEOs are courting Trump and tailoring their businesses to suck up to Trump to try to get political favors for regulation and for mergers. There's been a lot of controversy over the last week about Amazon's decision to release the Melania Trump documentary. They paid $40 million to license the Melania Trump documentary. I saw some reports that Melania herself earned $28 million as a part of that deal. And then Amazon spent a reported, I think, $35 million to market the movie, which that amount of money on a documentary makes little economic sense, except if you're a business that's trying to make sure that you stay on the right side of the government. That's a strategy that is straight out of Rupert's playbook. And I don't think Rupert gets enough credit. I think so many people focus on him as a right-wing media mogul or sort of the creator of modern propaganda, or they focus on the succession, the family drama, which these are all really important things to focus on. But I think, just the way he reinvented the way business gets done is, especially I think for your audience, something that when history looks back on him, I think he is a transformational business person. And I'm not saying for the better. I think one other point I want to make, I think the way Rupert was willing and able to rationalize anything for the sake of the bottom line is a lot of the same sort of toxic mentality that we see in Silicon Valley, the way that Facebook can rationalize the harm that social media has done to teenagers. Rupert Murdoch takes no responsibility for any of the things his papers publish. Really, his only measure is the company making money. And that sort of the profit at all costs mentality, I think, is also really something that he contributed to the culture that we live in today.
It's kind of funny. I was reading this, and also I've been rewatching 30 Rock, and there's an episode where Jack is looking for a new mentee, and he says, ambition is the willingness to kill the things you love and eat them to stay alive. Haven't you read my decorative throw pillow? Uh-huh. And it was so fitting, because I just started reading the book, and I was like, yep, that is pretty much the Rupert Murdoch mentality, and his ruthlessness has been his biggest strength, obviously, but it has totally come at the expense of
his relationship.
Come at the expense of a lot of things. All of his relationships. Some would say American democracy.
Yep.
But I would love to dial in a little bit on the topic of courting Trump, like you mentioned. That's something that, obviously Jeff Bezos or Amazon's been doing with the Melania documentary. I also think that the CBS acquisition is a big part of that.
Well, the Ellisons, of course.
And the new sort of entity that runs TikTok in America is sort of really the Rosemary's Baby combination of the Murdoch playbook of pursuing a business effort to curry favor with a politician so that you are not regulated to the extent that you might be otherwise.
Yeah. And
two, controlling the means of information dissemination in a really sinister way, mm-hmm. Right? It feels like that is Larry Ellison being all right, I've learned everything I can from Rupert Murdoch, and I will now execute the big plan of owning TikTok and CBS and maybe Warner Brothers.
No, I think that's right. I think, one of the things that you see the CEOs doing today by sucking up to Trump that they learned from Rupert is that in private, they all don't respect Trump. And, they obviously think he's a failed businessman, multiple bankruptcies. And when Trump first decided to run for president in 2015, Rupert Murdoch was very vocal with all of his senior lieutenants about how unfit he thought Trump was, what an idiot he thought Trump was. There's an anecdote in the book about how before the first Republican primary debate in 2015, that Rupert encouraged Roger Ailes, who was then running Fox News, to make sure that the Fox News anchors really hit Trump with hard questions at the opening debate. And that's when Megyn Kelly famously asked, Trump about his history of misogyny, which kicked off Trump's whole war on Megyn Kelly and created a whole other storyline in the campaign. But this was evidence that Murdoch was trying to stop Trump's candidacy. The Wall Street Journal was very much against Trump. That said, obviously that was not successful. So once Trump won, Murdoch made it very clear that he was going to get on the bandwagon and support Trump. And I think the most clear example of this that we saw was in the aftermath of the 2020 election, which Fox News jumped on the bandwagon and promoted Trump's stolen election lies. And Dominion Voting Systems, which was the voting machine company that sued Fox News for defamation for spreading these lies, that lawsuit was so revealing because in discovery, the public got access to all of the internal communications that Fox News executives and the Murdochs were talking about. And you read these things, and it's fascinating. In private, Rupert Murdoch and Lachlan and the Fox News personalities, they all knew that it was BS, that the election was stolen. They knew that Trump was lying, but they had to put Trump's lies on air because that's what the Fox News audience wanted. And if they didn't go along with the lies, the Fox News viewers would tune out and then switch over to rival networks like Newsmax or One America News. That's a case where Rupert Murdoch personally has no love for Donald Trump, but he cultivates a strategic relationship with him because it helps his business. And that's, I think, just to come full circle, that's exactly the playbook we're seeing with Silicon Valley. I mean, we see these founders like Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk and the Ellisons. These are people that built, multi-trillion dollar businesses from scratch. And they see Donald Trump, who was a failed casino mogul. And that they don't respect him as a businessman, but they know he has political power, so they have to deal with him.
Well, what's interesting is that Lachlan as a figure is much more into the real true MAGA movement. He's a dyed-in-the-wool MAGA guy. He's friends with Tucker Carlson, et cetera. And Rupert is obviously maybe a little more skeptical, but also at a certain point, it's fascinating. And I think another trait that Rupert has promulgated and that the Silicon Valley CEOs are emulating is that it actually doesn't matter if you believe it or not. And I think that's possibly a more sinister undercurrent than the rest of it. You don't actually have to believe anything as long as you are getting the right people to like you. And that is sort of scary and dangerous and so originated by Rupert Murdoch.
I think that's right. And it goes back to what I was saying earlier about, I think one of Rupert's most destructive legacies is that he's made it okay to rationalize anything just if it gives you more power or more profits. Someone asked me, what does Rupert Murdoch believe? Is he a conservative? And I say, yes, he's conservative, but the only ideology that he really believes in is capitalism, is money, is profit. And I think you can see throughout his career, he's been willing to cultivate liberal politicians if it's helped his business. In the 1990s, he switched from the Tories to Labour and supported Tony Blair when he was the prime minister of the UK. In the mid 2000s, when it looked like, George W. Bush and the Republicans here in America were going down the drain, Rupert cultivated a relationship with Hillary Clinton. He was almost flirting with endorsing Barack Obama for president in 2008. And it was only when Roger Ailes threatened to quit Fox News, which was Rupert's most profitable division. When Ailes threatened to quit over that, did Rupert switch and agreed to endorse John McCain as the Republican candidate. So it is a scary thought that CEOs, they don't have any values except whatever benefits their shareholders. And I guess you could say that's part of what's wrong and what's so broken in our culture right now is that if your only concern is what's going to raise your stock price, it allows you to look the other way when really bad, at least things that I believe are bad, are happening.
What do you think is going to happen if Rupert Murdoch ever dies, when Lachlan takes over? Like, where do you see it all going? You know, do you think he's going to be the sort of Rupert second coming, or?
No, and you can haul me back on your podcast and I'll admit to being wrong, but my prediction is that after Rupert dies, he'll sell them at some point for several reasons. You know, one, throughout his entire life, Lachlan has just proven that he's not a builder of businesses there's no way you can replace Rupert Murdoch. There's no other CEO, there's no media CEO that has built a company like he did. He doesn't just have that hunger that Rupert does. And furthermore, he lives in Australia, and it's very hard to run a global media business when you're halfway around the world. And he's shown no desire to move his family back to America to take over the empire. So I really see Lachlan in some ways as a caretaker CEO, as somebody that Rupert felt he could trust to protect the conservative view of the business and keep it out of James's hands. But after Rupert dies, I could imagine Lachlan selling the company or selling parts of the company to a conservative, maybe the Ellison, some other conservative multi-billionaire who would continue the editorial viewpoint. I think the most important thing for Rupert and Lachlan is that they protect the right-wing viewpoint of the media.
Gabe, thanks for joining us today. The book is Bonfire of the Murdochs, How the Epic Fight to Control the Last Great Media Dynasty Broke a Family and the World, and it's out now.
Good. Great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Okay, we're back with Ainsley, and it's time to wrap up the show with Keeping Tabs. This is where each one of us shares a story, trend, or piece of pop culture we're following right now, business or otherwise. Ainsley, since you're our guest, what are you keeping tabs on?
I'm keeping tabs on the New York Times profile in the style section of Clavicular. I don't know if anyone else has read this. Yeah.
Oh, yep. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Read
I've heard of
that. We talked about it on an Ink show last week, too.
You know, it's, I saw some criticism of the story as well for essentially sort of like platforming him, which I never really agree with. It's like, it's a news organization. Like, we should write about people shaping culture for good or bad. But the whole like looks Maxine thing, everything seems like it's like Maxine now. You're like thin Maxine, looks Maxine.
Sidewalk Maxing.
Sidewalk Maxine, yeah. And it's pretty exhausting. I'm curious like where we're all headed with this. But I don't know what you guys thought of it. I'm not super familiar with his content aside from some of the recent stuff that's come up. So I haven't spent a lot of time with this particular looks maxer.
Yeah, I've been aware of Clavicular for a few months now. Really, it seems like he's come into at least like the broader zeitgeist recently, but always had like a huge audience. And it's gross. It's disgusting. Just like tapping your face with a hammer, like on the boat, like so much stuff that's just like taking what is already a pretty fraught industry in terms of like beauty and wellness, like snake oil salesmen and all of that nonsense, to an extreme, a maxing level. It's grift maxing, essentially.
Yeah.
Grift maxing, absolutely. Misogyny maxing.
Yeah.
And it is like the interplay between these people and like the right wing is really not to be taken for granted, right? Like, the first time I heard of Clavicular was that video where him and Nick Fuentes and Andrew Tate were in the Miami nightclub, dancing to the Kanye West Heil Hitler song. You know, he makes $100,000 a month from streaming. That's real right-wing indoctrination there of like probably the like, what's a nice way to say this? Most impressionable people out there.
Yeah.
You know?
Yep. Yeah.
Which is like talk about like a crisis of masculinity and a crisis of like male loneliness. Like listening to fucking Clavicular isn't going to improve that, I don't think.
Well, he did say J.D. Vance was chopped and getting mogged on by Uber Chad Gavin Newsom. So,
I mean, take
that for what it's worth.
That's true.
David, what are you keeping tabs on?
I, like a good American, have been paying attention to the Olympics. I've been watching the Winter Olympics. They're wrapping up this weekend. I followed the men's figure skating situation. Ilya Malinin, the quad god. I don't know if you know about this. He shat the bed pretty spectacularly in his final skate.
No.
He finished 8th. Like, he was coming in a favorite for gold in men's figure skating, and he did so badly in his final skate that he ended up 8th, and it was really embarrassing. Like, you could tell he knew he screwed up. But I think, like, it's been interesting to see all the pressure that Olympic athletes are under, and how they respond to it. But also, like, some of the stuff that's going on is unbelievable. I mean, the Japanese figure skating pair that won gold yesterday, or on the 16th, were incredible. It's like insane feats of human ability that is fun to watch. And also the hockey matchups have been really fun to watch, and those are finishing up over the weekend. And also curling has been fun to watch. Have either of you, Josh, you said you haven't been watching the Olympics. Ainsley, have you?
I haven't been watching. My only insight into the Olympics is I saw a little bit of curling on the TikToks, and then I was following the story of the ski jumpers injecting hyaluronic acid into the yes, that I've been following closely. It's truly an engorged story. That doesn't even make any sense. I don't know. I'm just not a big Olympics guy overall. It's just not my thing. Ainsley, have you been following it?
Yeah, David, it's interesting, like, just watching people deal with the pressure. And for me, like, the sport where that has been most interesting is the biathlon, the cross-country skiing plus shooting. And it's so interesting the way, so they no, it's incredible. What's so hard about it is that you're doing incredible cardio, and then you have to stop and you have to train how to lower your heart rate and your breathing so you can be incredibly still to take these shots. But the thing, I kind of like knew a bit about that, but the thing I didn't realize is that you have a finite number of rounds for your shooting. You do it prone and then standing. And if you run out of shots, then you have to do like penalty laps, basically. So you can watch people. It's like someone will come in first and they'll start, and then they'll just start missing, and then they'll get in their head. And then they like can see everyone else getting up to leave. And then you're stuck there facing this possibility of penalty. And just like the mental stamina you must have to like block that out. It's really interesting. And to bring it back to like the looks maxing stuff, like, it's so sad to like people are doing all these crazy things to their body, like for no purpose. Like in some ways the Olympics is like, what is the purpose of gold medal? But it's like people pushing themselves for the purity of the sport. Mm-hmm. There is sort of this like broader goal that we can all get pulled up into and share in that achievement with them if they do so well. And I think that's what's so inspiring about it. And then like what's so awful about the other side of people pushing their bodies in these sort of, there's just like no higher purpose to it sort of other than yourself. And the contrast is just sort of crazy.
Yeah, you got to balance trying to move a sport forward with trying to like make an ego move. I mean, Ilya Malinin was a great example of that. You don't know where his head was. And also, I mean, unfortunately, like Lindsey Vonn really pushed herself too far. Like she tore her ACL like 2 weeks ago. And then in her first run just went down. And it's difficult to see. Her choices are whatever and informed by however she felt about her body. But it was maybe a bad move. Okay, Josh, to bring things up, what are you keeping tabs on?
I had very little to add to that conversation. I'm keeping tabs on... Guys, I need to get off X. I need to stop looking at X. Last week, this guy named Matt Schumer, he's an AI person, posted an article called "Something Big is Happening" about AI.
I saw this.
It's about the 7,000 think piece that's like, guys, you don't understand. AI is good. And it just set off this back and forth online of maybe some of the stupidest discourse around AI that I've ever seen in my entire life. Like, we cover AI really closely here, and like we can all agree in this room, like it's a big thing. Like it's a big piece of technology that's doing lots of things. We get that. So I understand the frustration with people that are like, it's only exclusively slop and is meaningless and is a trend. It's like, well, no, like, but then on the other side, you had people like Derek Thompson, who
and people like him who are out here are like, no, this thing, just like mouth agape awe at AI. And like some of the citing points they have is like, it can write a sonnet in perfect iambic pentameter.
Like, yeah,
And I'm
girl,
like-
it trained on Shakespeare. Duh.
Yeah. And I'm like, it's a lot of stuff that we do is formulaic. Like, we can all understand that. And that's why AI is better at certain things. So, like, we can get into all of that. But it was the stupidest conversation because then it basically cycled around like AI is a bubble because it's all slop, or AI isn't a bubble because it can write a sonnet, essentially. And neither of those things matter because a bubble has nothing to do with how well AI can write a sonnet or if it can write a book, or even if it's great technology. Like, yes, that matters, but there's been amazing technology that has failed miserably. The metaverse, amazing piece of technology. Utterly useless and not adopted. So this whole conversation of like Derek Thompson, and like Derek Thompson, I'm like, you're smarter than that, Derek Thompson. You know a bubble is about the valuation of companies, not about whether AI is good or not at doing certain things. So that was unfortunately what my feed on X became about, because I clicked on this one article and X's algorithm is so stupid at this point where if you click on one thing, it's like early days like Instagram ads, where if you looked at some D2C pants, you just got spammed ads for D2C pants over and over again.
That's still true on Instagram.
So I just saw this AI discourse over and over again. That's still how AI Instagram ads kind of works too to this point. It's infuriating. It's one of the stupidest discourses that will be had over and over and over again because some other like jagoff will write the same exact article 3 months from now and we'll do this all over again.
Yeah.
Yeah, drop mic.
Sounds like you need to get off X.
I need to get off X, guys. I gotta get on Upscroll. That's the new hot social media app.
Get on
you guys
Threads.
signed up for? This should have been my keeping tabs. I'm not going to Threads, David.
Threads is awesome. It's Facebook content, but like Twitter. It's incredible.
I just gotta get off. I gotta touch grass, man. This winter's been hard. I don't
It's
know if
been
you
tough.
can tell.
Once summer's
Seasonal
here,
affective disorder has been getting to me this year.
once it warms up, no phones, just vibes.
Seriously, I'm gonna put my phone away and go into the woods. It's 2026, baby. Okay, that's all for this week's episode of Most Innovative Companies. Ainsley, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, Ainsley.
Thank you for having me.
Our show is produced by Blake Odom, Sam Gebauer, Hawa Atori, and Mariam Kiparuitse. Editing by Matt Toder, mix and sound design by Tad Wadhams and Nicholas Torres, and our executive producer is me. Remember again to subscribe, rate, and review, and we will see you next week.